Chapter 32 of Ruth. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Cynthia Lyons. Ruth by Elizabeth Cleghorn Gaskell. Chapter 32. The Bradshaw pew again occupied. If Jemima allowed herself now and then to imagine that one good would result from the discovery of Richard's delinquency, in the return of her father and Mr Benson to something of their old understanding and their old intercourse, if this hope fluttered through her mind, it was doomed to disappointment. Mr Benson would have been most happy to go, if Mr Bradshaw had sent for him. He was on the watch for what might be even the shadow of such an invitation, but none came. Mr Bradshaw, on his part, would have been thoroughly glad if the wilful seclusion of his present life could have been broken by the occasional visits of the old friend whom he had once forbidden the house; but this prohibition having passed his lips, he stubbornly refused to do anything which might be construed into unsaying it. Jemima was for some time in despair of his ever returning to the office, or resuming his old habits of business. He had evidently threatened as much to her husband. All that Jemima could do was to turn a deaf ear to every allusion to this menace, which he threw out from time to time, evidently with a view to see if it had struck deep enough into her husband's mind for him to have repeated it to his wife. If Mr Farquhar had named it, if it was known only to 2 or 3 to have been, but for 1/2 hour even, his resolution, Mr Bradshaw could have adhered to it, without any other reason than the maintenance of what he called consistency, but which was in fact doggedness. Jemima was often thankful that her mother was absent, and gone to nurse her son. If she had been at home, she would have entreated and implored her husband to fall back into his usual habits, and would have shown such a dread of his being as good as his word, that he would have been compelled to adhere to it by the very consequence affixed to it. Mr Farquhar had hard work, as it was, in passing rapidly enough between the two places, attending to his business at Eccleston, and deciding, comforting, and earnestly talking in Richard's sick room. During an absence of his, it was necessary to apply to one of the partners on some matter of importance, and accordingly, to Jemima's secret joy, Mr Watson came up and asked if her father was well enough to see him on business. Jemima carried in this inquiry literally, and the hesitating answer which her father gave was in the affirmative. It was not long before she saw him leave the house, accompanied by the faithful old clerk, and when he met her at dinner, he made no allusion to his morning visitor, or to his subsequent going out. But from that time forwards he went regularly to the office. He received all the information about Dick's accident, and his progress towards recovery, in perfect silence, and in as indifferent a manner as he could assume; but yet he lingered about the family sitting room every morning until the post had come in which brought all letters from the south. When Mr Farquhar at last returned to bring the news of Dick's perfect convalescence, he resolved to tell Mr Bradshaw all that he had done and arranged for his son's future career. But, as Mr Farquhar told Mr Benson afterwards, he could not really say if Mr Bradshaw had attended to one word that he said. "Rely upon it," said Mr Benson, "he has not only attended to it, but treasured up every expression you have used." "Well, I tried to get some opinion or sign of emotion out of him. I had not much hope of the latter, I must own; but I thought he would have said whether I had done wisely or not in procuring that Glasgow situation for Dick. that he would perhaps have been indignant at my ousting him from the partnership so entirely on my own responsibility. How did Richard take it? Oh, nothing could exceed his penitence. If one had never heard of the proverb, "When the devil was sick, the devil a monk would be," I should have had greater faith in him, or if he had had more strength of character to begin with, or more reality and less outward appearance of good principle instilled into him. However, this Glasgow situation is the very thing. Clear, defined duties, no great trust reposed in him, a kind and watchful head, and introductions to a better class of associates than I fancy he has ever been thrown amongst before. For, you know, Mr Bradshaw dreaded all intimacies for his son, and wanted him to eschew all society beyond his own family, would never allow him to ask a friend home. Really, when I think of the unnatural life Mr Bradshaw expected him to lead, I get into charity with him, and have hopes. By the way, have you succeeded in persuading his mother to send Leonard to school? He may run the same risk from isolation as Dick, not able to choose his companions wisely when he grows up, but be too much overcome by the excitement of society to be very discreet as to who are his associates. Have you spoken to her about my plan? Yes, but to no purpose. I cannot say that she would even admit an argument on the subject. She seemed to have an invincible repugnance to the idea of exposing him to the remarks of other boys on his peculiar position. They need never know of it. Besides, sooner or later, he must step out of his narrow circle, and encounter remark and scorn. "True," said Mr Benson mournfully. "And you may depend upon it, if it really is the best for Leonard, she will come round to it by and by. It is almost extraordinary to see the way in which her earnest and most unselfish devotion to this boy's real welfare leads her to right and wise conclusions. I wish I could tame her so as to let her meet me as a friend. Since the baby was born, she comes to see Jemima. My wife tells me that she sits and holds it soft in her arms, and talks to it as if her whole soul went out to the little infant. But if she hears a strange footstep on the stair, what Jemima calls the wild animal look comes back into her eyes, and she steals away like some frightened creature. With all that she has done to redeem her character, she should not be so timid of observation. You may well say, with all that she has done. We of her own household hear little or nothing of what she does. If she wants help, she simply tells us how and why; but if not, perhaps because it is some relief to her to forget for a time the scenes of suffering in which she has been acting the part of comforter; and perhaps because there always was a shy, sweet reticence about her, we never should know what she is and what she does, except from the poor people themselves, who would bless her in words, if the very thought of her did not choke them with tears. Yet, I do assure you, she passes out of all this gloom, and makes sunlight in our house. We are never so cheerful as when she is at home. She always had the art of diffusing peace, but now it is positive cheerfulness. And about Leonard, I doubt if the wisest and most thoughtful schoolmaster could teach half as much directly, as his mother does unconsciously and indirectly every hour that he is with her. Her noble, humble, pious endurance of the consequences of what was wrong in her early life seems expressly fitted to act upon him, whose position is, unjustly, for he has done no harm, so similar to hers. Well, I suppose we must leave it alone for the present. You will think me a hard practical man when I own to you that all I expect from Leonard's remaining a home bird is that, with such a mother, it will do him no harm. At any rate, remember my offer is the same for a year, 2 years hence as now. What